request you to stand and remain standing until you are directed to sit. You may be seated. Thank you very much.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, greetings, and a warm welcome to this ZK Matthews Centenary Public Lecture. I am Vuisile Nkongi, Director at the Teaching and Learning Center. I'll be directing sessions for the proceedings today. Before we get started, let me just make a few remarks. The program is as is, with speakers and 2 interlude sessions in which there will be a rendition of musical items. I hope you have the program in your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, by way of remarks, I just want to make a few reflection questions. One being, what did you do to prepare yourself mentally and morally for this event? This is ZK Matthews Centenary Public Lecture. And the other question that I'd like to ask you is, what did you do to prepare yourselves mentally and morally for the year that UFH has declared the ZK Matthews year? I'll tell you what I did, and I'm continuing to do. One of the things that I did was to search my father's mini library for the ZK Matthews autobiography, and I got hold of it, the ZK Matthews autography. I had seen this book a long time, but I never gave myself time to read it. And what I did was to just go through the pages of the book, and it is my goal to finish it before the end of this semester. And so I urge all of you to get hold of the book, ZK Matthews autobiography, read it as individuals, as groups, and also in your book clubs if you're part of a book club. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues, now is the time to invite Professor Sakela Buhlungu to deliver remarks, opening, and give us a sense of purpose for this event. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I had to negotiate time with the program director so that I can take at least half the time that the guest speaker will take. Greetings once again. Thank you very much for making time to attend this event. My name is Sakela Buhlungu, and I'm here just for one easy kind of function, role. It is to welcome all of you to this event today. I'll say a little bit about the event just now. But before I do that, I just want to say there are different categories of people in the room, and but I will not be able to acknowledge all of them, but I want to cluster them. The first one is the guest speaker and his wife. Professor Makhoba is here, and also Naledi is here. Thank you very much for coming, and thanks, Professor Makhoba, for agreeing to deliver this lecture. Then I want to move and I recognize the family. And the family, the ones, please pardon me if I didn't meet others. I'll start with Ms. Nagani, one of the granddaughters there, over there, yes. Thank you very much. I would also like to welcome Mr. Pandor, who's here up front. Yes, thank you very much. And then I would like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Pandor, Naledi Pandor, who's the Minister of International Relations, but also a granddaughter, like Ms. Nagani, a granddaughter of ZK Matthews. There are others, again, I don't have the names at my fingertips here. We will find time as we go along to acknowledge them. I must just add that every time, because this is an annual event, every time we hold the event, there's always a representative from the family, and we're very pleased that once again they're here. Thank you very much. And then the third category, of course, are staff and students at the University of Fort Hare. Once again, thanks for coming to this event. Then I would like to introduce my colleagues, the deans of faculties who are here. I'm not going to say them by name. Also members of the Management Executive Committee. I'm also not going to say much about them. I'm not going to identify them by name, that is. So that's the welcome. That's the welcome part. Just before, I must say that we were sitting in the other room doing introductions, and people said, I worked with Professor Makgoba, and I was looking for something that would also attach me to Professor Makgoba. Eventually I found it, that he worked at WITS when I was working at WITS in 1995. So I worked with Professor Makgoba. So that's very important, but Professor Makgoba will be introduced in full when the time comes. Now let me just, as I conclude, talk about the event itself. As Professor Nkongi indicated, Mr. Makubel, greetings, I didn't see you. Thank you very much. As Professor Nkongi said earlier, we decided to declare this year, 2024, as the year of Professor Z.K. Matthews for a number of reasons. The first and most obvious one, of course, is that it is now 100 years since he graduated from this university. He was our first graduate in 1924. The first graduate. I think that's very significant. And so we said, let every staff member, every student, aspire to be like Professor Matthews, to achieve like Professor Matthews, but also to be principled like Professor Matthews. And so we're hoping that this, as Professor Nkongi was saying, everyone will find something, will go and do a search and read up on Professor Matthews, who he was, what he stood for, and all of that. The other reason we decided to name this year as the year of Z.K. Matthews is that he was also a professor, a lecturer, professor. He was also an administrator. And at one time, he acted as vice chancellor of the university. They didn't call it vice chancellor in those days. So here is someone who spent most of his working life working for this university. First studying and then working for this university. But also, another reason that's uppermost in our mind is that one role for which Professor Z.K. Matthews has not been acknowledged for, it is that he was a defender of academic freedom and university autonomy. He was a strong defender, so strong that in fact, when he was given the two options, when the university was taken over and given to Bantu education, they said you can stay, but you're no longer a politician. Resign all your positions. You are now a civil servant. The only other option he had was to leave. And it's obviously one of those things. It is that act in defense of academic freedom that we should celebrate, especially today, especially us as Fort Hare, us, academic freedom. Of course, academic freedom today and university autonomy, or threats to them, come in different guises. It doesn't come in the same guise as it did under Bantu education. It comes differently now, because it means we have to defend institutions from capture, from looting, from all other things. And so as we celebrate Professor Matthews, we should really, really treasure the legacy that he left us. That's of a defender of academic freedom and university autonomy, a lover of knowledge and intellectual. And that's what we come to celebrate. And so I'm very pleased then that all of us here have come to this. I'm particularly pleased. I see younger ones in the room who are also here to learn about Professor Matthews. But today's topic is going to be, I'm looking forward to it myself. I'm looking forward to the talk by Professor Makgoba. But it's not going to end here. We said, because it's the year of ZK Matthews, we're going to do other things, a series of other things for the year. We also flagged it prominently during graduation last week, very prominently. And the message to graduates was this: go out into the world, but remember, you are from Forte. Be like ZK Matthews. And I think that's one of the takeaway messages for all of us, especially in days where there are people determined to take shortcuts in life. ZK Matthews did not take a shortcut. And we do not tolerate people who take shortcuts. I think that's a very important part. Thank you very much, Professor Nkongi. I'm now going to step down.
I now call upon for a music item, artist Miss Mafuta. Please come forward. Thank you.
Because I'll be performing an original song that is about Ezekiel Matthews. I did a research and then that is later in my program. So please do enjoy.
This is beautiful. Yeah, awesome and inspiring. Yeah, another big round of applause for Ms. Mafuta. I failed to ask whether this is available for public consumption or is it still under wraps. I hope you'll make it available, so that it's sung by all of us as our anthem for this year. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues, Professor William Malekapuru Makgoba, I remember vividly reading Mail and Guardian newspaper articles about leadership and transformation issues at VETS, and that was in the 1990s. There was a series of those articles in the Mail and Guardian. I had just started as a high school teacher then. I never imagined that I would ever see Professor Makgoba with my naked eyes. But here he is, with us here. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the time when black academics were forcefully announcing their arrival and claiming their rightful place and space in the historically white universities. That institution where he was, that establishment, and the entire higher education sector was shaken up to the core. I will not say much about him because he will be formally introduced by Dr. Taule Mchimba. Over to you, Dr. Mchimba.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What an honor and privilege to be here and to introduce to you Professor Malekapuru Mampokoro William Makgoba. Puki, as I heard his beloved wife call him. Professor Makgoba was born in the village of Skunort in Khukhuni in 1952. He is the eldest son of Muriti and Makhwadi. He attended Makhane Primary School and went to matriculate at Whitty High School in 1970, obtaining a first-class pass. Professor Makgoba received an MBCHB degree from the University of Natal Medical School in 1976 with merit in medicine. Yes. In 1979, he was named the first African Newfield Dominion Fellow to the University of Oxford, where he completed his DPhil degree in human immunogenetics in 1983 under Professor Sir Andrew McMichael. The title of his thesis was Studies on the Polymorphism of HLDA class II antigens. He obtained one of the first HLDA DQ beta sequences. Professor Sir Andrew McMichael said of Professor Makgoba in his journal Science, in the journal Science 1981, I quote, "A good scientist, but with a mission to do something special for his people," I unquote. Professor Makgoba's contributions to immunobiology are nothing short of groundbreaking. His pioneering work alongside esteemed colleagues at the National Cancer Institute in the United States of America laid the foundation for our understanding of lymphocyte adhesion and T-cell recognition. This seminal research not only shaped the evolution of immunobiology, but also spawned therapeutic advancements across diverse medical disciplines. Professor Makgoba's impact extends far beyond the laboratory, as I shall just highlight some of his achievements. One, from being appointed as the first African Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of the Witwatersrand, he blazed a trail of excellence and inclusivity, setting new standards for leadership in higher education. His tenure as the president of the South African Medical Research Council witnessed unparalleled transformation as he navigated the challenges of HIV/AIDS denialism with courage and conviction. His leadership reached new heights as the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where he oversaw the successful merger and transformation of two institutions into a beacon of research excellence. In his role as the founding health ombud of the Republic that embodies his commitment to justice and accountability, his unwavering pursuit for truth in the face of adversity, as exemplified by his investigation into the Life Isidimeni tragedy, stands as a testament to his integrity and compassion. Professor Makgoba's impact extends far beyond the borders of South Africa. He has been recognized internationally for his scholarly contributions and his role in shaping the discourse of transformation in higher education. Beyond his professional accomplishments, he is also a prolific author and visionary thinker. His seminal works include Leadership for Transformation Since the Dawn of South Africa's Democracy, An Insider's View. One of this, and in particular this book, offers invaluable insights into the challenges and opportunities facing our country, inspiring us to strive for a better tomorrow. In recognition of his outstanding contributions, Professor Makgoba has received numerous accolades, including the prestigious National Order of Mapungubwe. He is married to advocate Naledi Ribani, a legendary actor, author, and model whose support and partnership have been instrumental in Professor Makgoba's journey. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Makgoba to the podium to deliver his lecture.
Program Director, Vice Chancellor, I thought they were talking about someone else and not myself. Honorable Vice Chancellor, the Faculty of Education, the Matthews and Bokwe families, the Registrar, the Deputy Vice Chancellors, the Executive Management Committee, the Senate, academics, members of Council, the Deputy Chair of Council is here, convocation, students, community members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and those that are joining us, I think, through the live streaming programs. I'm truly grateful for this opportunity to share my few thoughts with the University of Fort Hare community, the Matthews and Bokwe family, of my own findings of what this great giant Z.K. Matthews stood for and what he represented to us as Africans, to us in South Africa, and I think to the global community that we have and continue to exist in. It is a great honor which I do not take very lightly. It is actually very special. Let me just make a few remarks. Most of you may not realize that today is Victory Day, which marks the end of World War II in 1945. And there is, as we speak right now, there would be a parade in Red Square, Russia, to remember such significant occurrence. More importantly, you would remember, or you would have read, that Z.K. Matthews died on the 11th of May. And the 11th of May is only 2 days away, and here we are, I think, celebrating his centennial existence at the University of Fort Hare. But also, let's just remember that tomorrow marks 30 years of Madiba standing at the Union buildings and making that speech that I recall had about 4 never, 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 about what sort of country we should be creating. I have chosen to title my talk as Achieving the Impossible Through Seeing the Invisible. This is a theme that I wrote about, I think, somewhere in the late 90s when I was trying to articulate my thinking about higher education. Let me start by making the following remarks. Z.K. was born on the 20th of October, 1901. The first Z.K. memorial lecture was delivered by none other than the former president, Thabo Mbeki, to mark 100 years of his birth in 2001. Several people who delivered the memorial lectures were either politicians or people who knew Z.K. quite well. I do not share these experiences. I did not know him. But now you may realize that I do know him. I am particularly grateful to follow in the footsteps and share this journey with them in paying tribute to a world-acclaimed intellectual scholar and a pathfinder of our time, and one of us that sometimes we seem not to recognize or to realize the role he played. This memorial lecture today marks 100 years since Z.K. graduated from this university, the university that at the moment I think hosts the archives of the liberation struggle. In preparation for this lecture, in addition to reading as much as I could lay my eyes and hands about Z.K., I relied on my research and investigative skill as a health ombud. But importantly, I had the generosity of his family, that assisted me. His youngest daughter, Pulani Ngakani, his son-in-law, Zola Ngakani, I think their daughter is here today, Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor, the granddaughter, Jose Matthews, the brother, and Ambassador Kitty Matthews, who is in Kazakhstan at the moment, I think, watching the television at Red Square as we speak. And others who knew him, like Mr. Ronnie Castrals, Professor Bani Pichana, who was a student at Lovedale when Z.K. Matthews was living Fort Hare in 1959 and 1960, practicing law in Alice. I also relied on the works of two postgraduate students, research students, at the University of Western Cape, Nombila A.W. and Mr. Rasul C. And Minister Pandor suggested that I get her grandmother's book entitled Remembrance, written by Frida Poco Matthews, that reflects a little bit more, I think, of what ZK was like and the type of person he was. So I'm grateful to all these insights because they've provided me on this intellectual giant that I'm going to speak about. As you are all aware, we are only 20 days from the 7th national elections, and it only seemed smart for the University of Fort Hare to choose a non-political person to deliver this important lecture, but equally to avoid or eliminate the possibility of election campaigning during this period. Coincidentally, like Z.K. Matthews, I was born in October too. It's just a coincidence. Now, I'm going to read the abstract which summarizes my thoughts and my thinking, and then I'll deliver the lecture. Achieving the impossible through seeing the invisible. This is the title of my lecture. This is about the foresight, the legacy, and lessons of the life of a distinguished African to the core, and I quote that from his wife, acclaimed academic social anthropologist, a renowned educationist, an extraordinary intellectual, a liberator, a defender of academic freedom, as it has already been mentioned, an ecumenist, that is somebody who is interested in interdenominational unity, and a transformation pathfinder that Professor Z.K. Matthews was. Through his sheer force of intellect, foresight, his political activism, his humility, his lack of pompousness, and his distaste for boastfulness, he saw the invisible, the future of a non-racial democratic South Africa. It was around 1953 when he had just returned from New York, when he was sitting with his family at lunch, so his wife says, that Professor Matthews shared his vision. First with his family and his sons, and they were debating it because he was a very consultative person, a good listener, of the country that we, South Africa, were to become in 1994. He was seeing this in 1953 and sharing it with his family. And the importance of this is that here was an African with an idea and a vision. And I think I'll pack that for later on. He was a man that is described everywhere as a man of isitunzi. I think those that speak this Nguni languages understand that. His wife said that. His son-in-law said that. In fact, I will quote what his son-in-law exactly said in his own words. And this became actually the title of a book called The Man with a Shadow by a missionary professor at UNISA, entitled The Man with a Shadow, The Life and Times of Z.K. Matthews. That reflected how he was perceived generally, even by other people. Now, I'm going to quote here from one of his granddaughters. Professor Matthews loved knowledge and nature. He had plants in his house. He had animals in his house. He loved dogs and cats. He taught all his children and grandchildren to love nature and animals. He had great respect for intellectual rigor and excellence, merit, and paid attention to minutiae and details. He was not somebody that you could just bamboozle with ideas, and he doesn't actually interrogate those ideas. Importantly, and this may be something that most of you may not know, he was a mathematician. And as you know, mathematicians in general often have clear thinking. They are like horses wearing oogklaps. When they see something, they see it clearly, and they see it in a very piercing fashion. If they don't understand it and you don't clarify it, it sometimes suggests you don't understand it yourself. So he was that kind of person whose mind worked with that level of clarity. His academic interest in social anthropology, which was his discipline, and native law had a direct bearing on the political issues of his time and his political activism. Z.K. Matthews lived his life in the domain or the realm of ideas. He was an ideas person. All the time, he was challenging himself and challenging other people wherever he had an opportunity. He was keen on how society organized itself, the importance of identity, history, culture of societies, like an anthropologist should be. Language became an important asset in his intellectual and academic pursuit. He loved languages. He was proficient in Greek, German, French, Latin, history, and music. That's why I think we should give another round of applause for the young girl here who sang the music. We loved music. Here is the fascinating thing. One of his granddaughters says he could do simultaneous translation of Latin and Greek. How many of us today can do that here, even in this hall? He played the violin competently. Of course, his wife was a pianist who taught many people to play the piano. He was also a close friend of someone called Paul Robeson, an American baritone, those that love music, and a political activist. They met somewhere at the London School of Economics. And he had exchanges, academic exchanges and intellectual exchanges with Du Bois, the renowned American sociologist. He was a great listener, a believer, and content with himself despite constant harassment, arrests, banishments of the oppressive colonial apartheid governments. However, none of this ever broke his spirit and his vision for acting and representing the African people during the period where he was participating. The combination of social anthropology and native law that he taught for a long time as an academic and as academic interest naturally led Professor Matthews into political activism. This was Kitty Matthews from Kazakhstan. She prides herself of being the eldest granddaughter of Z.K. Matthews. So, in short, Z.K. Matthews, his heart life and public life was that of an intellectual academic with a social conscience. And this is a very special type of academic. Most academics pursue academia for its own sake or knowledge for its own sake. There are a few scholars who pursue knowledge, trying to understand how it will assist the societies of humankind in its development. And Z.K. Matthews was that type of intellectual, and that's why he could do the things that he could do. So in this lecture, I shall focus on three intertwined and tightly linked transformative foresights of Z.K. Matthews, and how this influenced his seminal contributions on education transformation, and this is called Africanization, because that's what he discussed long before it became fashionable. The politics of liberation, which is characterized by African identity, non-racialism, equality, and the Freedom Charter. And the church, how missionaries, African identity, and traditional African religion struggled with each other in the same individual during his generation, and how these contradictions influenced a persona of Z.K. Matthews' type. All three were grounded on deep intellectual and scholarly rigor, analysis, debates, and writings. In this lecture, through timeline analysis, which I did, I wish to argue and provide evidence and conclude that only Z.K. Matthews, the academic intellectual scholar of our time, transformed African education through Africanization and conceived the idea of the Congress of the People. And I want to emphasize, he conceived the idea. And most of you who are scholars know what happens when a person conceives an idea. He conceived the idea of the Congress of the People and the fundamentals of the Freedom Charter that laid the blueprint for South Africa's non-racial democratic constitution that we enjoy today, and transformation long before it gained currency. He was the originator, and I want to emphasize, he was the originator and creator of these ideas, and no one else but him. And this is captured by Frida Matthews in her book Remembrance, but it's also captured by Anthony Simpson in the famous Mandela biography on page 88 to page 89. It's also captured in the biography of Dennis Goldberg, and also captured by Mandela himself in his own autobiography. In many respects, Z.K. Matthews was intellectually ahead of his time. Professor Matthews, I believe, should unashamedly be given full credit for these ideas and be memorialized more than we currently do. I think the gross failure, or what I call omissions or selective amnesia or memorialization of Professor Matthews as a national hero or icon, is reminiscent of two other intellectual giants of our struggle. A former Fort Hare alumni, the founding president of the PAC, Robert Mangaliso Sobusa, and the founder of the Black Consciousness Movement, and I suppose a senior of mine at medical school, Stephen Bantu Biko. All these leaders, ZK, Robert Sobukwe, Steve Biko, and Du Bois, sought to assert Black identity and confident self-consciousness without hatred of other people. They were peace-loving people, but they knew what the struggle was all about. I believe it's about time we became sensitive in the manner we documented and wrote our history truthfully and gave credit and recognition where it is due. As we rightly continue to correct our history, as written by our colonial apartheid masters, let's write our own history as it closely resembles the truth and the reality of the struggle and the time, without having selective memories or selective amnesia. Perhaps more than ever in our history and development, we need leaders and the leadership quality of the likes of Professor Z.K. Matthews. I'm going to conclude my abstract. Like all of us, Professor Z.K. Matthews was created in the image of God. Like all of us, he was biologically unique with a permutation, and not a combination, a permutation of unique phenotypical characteristics of intellect, foresight, humility, a mathematical mind, clarity of thinking, strength of character, with unshakable focus and absolute belief in his vision. As I've indicated, he loved music and he loved nature. This permutation, and I repeat, and not combination, unlike no other, is what distinguished and set him apart. Professor Matthews was an intellectual scholar extraordinaire. I recommend that Professor Matthews, as a national treasure, be given his due recognition and true stature in our history, in our memorialization, and be celebrated nationally, proudly, and publicly. He mustn't be located at the University of Hare or in the Eastern Cape or somewhere. This is a national icon, not only of our nation, but the globe. And we are busy sort of like walking around with our head between our legs, hiding him as if we don't know him. I believe that this has to come to an end if we are really writing the true history of who we are and where we are from. So, in short, what I'm saying is that in doing this, we will be fulfilling what Marcus Garvey said, that we should not be like a tree without roots. So, thank you, sir. You see, some people are very observant. Okay. It was on the 13th of May, 1968, at our school assembly at Whitty High, when Miss Winnie Mtlalipule Hare, she was our Afrikaans teacher. She had established the SRC at Whitty High School under the leadership of Peter Mokaba as president, and she was an anti-apartheid activist with the Black Consciousness Movement, and later became the first president of the Black People's Convention. She announced on that Monday that Professor Z.K. Matthews, the Republic of Botswana's first ambassador to the US and the permanent UN envoy, had died in Washington, D.C. She requested for a minute of silence to be observed, to which we acceded. She further said she and her husband, Professor Hare, who was a professor of didactic education, or didactics as they call it, and Professor Ntsangwisi, who became the leader of the Tsonga homeland, and his wife, Beatrice, who was our Latin teacher, would depart to Gaborone in Botswana to attend the funeral of Z.K. Matthews. This was the first time I would hear the name Z.K. Matthews. Indeed, the Juarez and the Nzangwesi traveled to Gaborone on a Friday to Botswana for Z.K. Matthews' funeral. On the 19th of October 1995, I returned from a diversity conference in higher education in the USA. I was the Ministers of Education's Vice Chancellor nominee. The minister was Professor Sibusiso Benku, the first African Vice Chancellor of this university, of Fort Hare, on behalf of the National Commission on Higher Education. On this visit, I met the now Dr. Naledi Pandor, who was representing the ANC at the time. She was the government nominee, and we spent a whole week together attending and learning from this diversity conference. As you now know, Dr. Naledi is the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Is, of course, the granddaughter of Professor Matthews. Put that thought in your mind. Her grandfather was an international diplomat who represented Botswana at the UN and was an ambassador. Our current Minister of International Relations, the granddaughter, is doing exactly the same thing. The National Commission on Higher Education was the first structure to draft the blueprint for the transformation of higher education in South Africa post-1994. A highly acclaimed educationist and a revered world over, Professor Matthews had begot another future educationist in Naledi Pandor, who was Minister of Higher Education before she became Minister of. So there is something in the family traits. I can't call it genes, but those that know a little bit more about this than me, you may make your choices. But there is something about a family trait where somebody in the family chooses to retrace the footsteps of their fathers or their grandfather or their aunties and so forth. In this case, I think you've got an example quite here. But more importantly, her elder sister is also an ambassador. So international issues, debates that are today the order of the day are being handled by some of us or one of us here who comes from this part of the world. And these are the granddaughters of a great international person in ZK. Of course, there are many other things that one can say about this, but Frida Matthews, the grandmother of these granddaughters I'm talking about, described her husband as follows, that he had a wonderful gift for drafting memoranda, drawing up resolution, and writing speeches for other colleagues or for his colleagues. And sometimes these colleagues would take what he had written and appropriate it to themselves. It's called plagiarism in academia. They would, without acknowledging him and so forth. So he had that gift, and I think it was recognized by many other colleagues. So, as somebody said, I'd just written a book, and one of the things that I wrote before I was asked to give this lecture was about leadership. And one of the people I wrote about was the granddaughter, Dr. Naledi Pandor. And I just wanted to capture just one thing that I said about her. I didn't know she was going to be here, but it doesn't matter. It's not a secret. It's in a book. I described her as an effective coordinator in terms of her leadership role. She always takes people along. She consults and she listens. Almost like when I read her grandmother's book and see how I have interacted with her and I've seen her in operation, it's almost like I'm seeing her grandfather. That's how she is. Efficient, effective, a good listener, and always achieving results. I mean, we now have obviously the Palestinian issue that comes out of that kind of clarity of thinking. So that is what I wanted to say a little bit about Dr. Pandor. So one of the things that exercised my mind was, here we have Z.K. Matthews. He's buried in Botswana, Gaborone, and not in South Africa. And I wanted to know why. For this, I had a conversation and a discussion with her youngest daughter, Pulane Ngakane. All she could say to me was that her father obviously had a close relationship with the Hamas, Seretse and Tsikedi, and they always sought advices from him. But more importantly, his father had originated from Serowe when he came to Kimberley to meet the mother. So he always felt that his ancestry lay in Botswana, and he always wanted to go back there. And I think as Africans, we don't defy the wishes of a deceased person. And that's why he ultimately ended up being buried in Botswana rather than in South Africa. I just wanted to clarify that because some people would wonder, why would such an important person not be buried here in South Africa but be buried in Botswana? So the next question I asked myself is, who is Z.K. Matthews? I've already told you something about it, but let me find out from other people, who was this person? Again, I went to his wife's description of Z.K. Matthews. This is found on page 89 of Remembrance. She described her husband as follows: my husband's personality was complex, a combination of humility and pride, of kindliness and sternness, of one ever ready to accept and appreciate others' point of view, but who nevertheless stood foursquare on his own viewpoint, unshaken and unafraid. African to the core of his being, yet he was completely Western in many aspects of his life. Living with him was stimulating and exciting, and most of us wish we could have that kind of relationship, as his encyclopedic mind was ever reaching out, making daily concourse, even with the most illiterate, a joy to listen to. It could never be easy to portray a man of his character and caliber. And she said, this short picture I've given of him here, I dedicate to my grandchildren. And you can see that I think some of them have actually learned a lot from it. I then asked Ronnie Castro, what type of person was Z.K. Matthews? Ronnie said he learned that Z.K. Matthews had initiated the idea of the ANC needing a document such as the Freedom Charter. I quote from his own words. Z.K. was a very impressive and absolute leader of the movement and the originator of the Congress of the People and the Freedom Charter. Again, I'm talking about an idea here. I mustn't be misunderstood. Then I asked Minister Pandor what she thought of her grandfather. And this is her reflection. The character of Professor Z.K. Matthews, while effective and with strong ideas, indeed tended to prefer the background. He was a person who did things without expecting to be praised or to be immediately recognized or be what, but he did things effectively. So he chose to sit towards the background. Also, he was one of the leaders, often in detention and under house arrest. Thus, many people took credit for what he contributed and did not acknowledge him. Then she says something that is quite interesting here. She says, I can recall an amusing story my father told. Her father is Joe Matthews, the late Joe Matthews, walking to a public meeting where a leader was attributing Z.K. Matthews' words to himself. You can imagine I'm sitting here and I'm talking as if it's me, and the leader almost collapsed when my father walked in because he realized what he had been doing all the time. So Z.K. Matthews merely sought to contribute, not to be recognized, a failing perhaps, but very much the character of the person. And this is all consistent across the board. Professor Matthews obviously had that unusual characteristic of scholars or academics of independent, detached reflection based on principle, integrity, the truth, ethics, passionate rationale with very little emotions, objectivity in analysis of ideas or facts, and shining light in the dark corners of some of the complex issues or matters of the day, and enjoying his contribution to extending the boundaries of knowledge and understanding without expecting rewards. This is what defines and characterizes excellent scholars everywhere. He was allegedly even complimented by a judge during the treason trial that he treated his own evidence so objectively and handled that evidence very well that the judge complimented him, that he could be, without conflict, treat his evidence objectively, and they recognized that. This is the measure of this intellectual giant. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to come to my second point that I want to make for this lecture. Professor Z.K. Matthews, the academic scholar and educationist. Z.K. commented once and said, the problem of South Africa can be defined as the problem of education. This was his key. And when he went to become a teacher and an educationist and not an educationalist, he went into Fort Hare hoping to bring innovation into the curriculum of teaching at the University of Fort Hare. And clearly, this was his mission, and he saw that as his mission. And I just wish to quote one or a couple of things. He saw education and said, education should be the master key to collective empowerment. And in around 1988 or so, or 1996, as a Professor Simon said that Professor Matthews saw South Africa's problem as a problem of education. In short, he pioneered and championed the transformation of education through social anthropology teaching at Fort Hare to aspiring young anthropologists to bring, I think, the curriculum innovation, which is documented by Dr. Birchall. As I've already indicated, Professor Matthews enjoyed and loved languages, and he was proficient in many languages that I've already spoken about. But here is another example. On the 5th of October 2006, a certain Minister of Education by the name of Dr. Pandor, who happens to be Professor Matthews' granddaughter, organized a conference on language policy implementation in higher education. The very same thing that her granddad did. So we were all going there to attend. We didn't know where Dr. Pandor had learned this, whether it was at home or it was the idea. there you are. Certain things have their own fingerprints. She organized this at UNISA. I participated in that conference. But again, it emphasized the importance of language in education, language in the transmission of cultures, language in the way societies are organized and become societies. So I'm just trying to repeat this as a man that I've observed as I was trying to understand this man. Clearly, education as his mantra, he saw it really as a very important thing in the ladder of individual sovereignty. To be a master of your own destiny, education was very important. He said, education should be for all, by all, and for life. Through education, one learned to be. I've already spoken about how he and others asserted, I think, a black identity. To know, to do, and to live and influence others and the world. Of course, education allows nations of the world to compete with each other, to interact and to interconnect, and to internationalize knowledge and culture. Higher education in particular is very critical for all of this. Through higher education, nations of the world achieve the impossible through seeing the invisible. So education is a silent power that allows us to organize ourselves as societies, to understand the world in which we live better, to interact better as people, and to debate issues and resolve matters that are complex in the world. It is through education that we do all of these things. However, I have to state the obvious, that as far as I can read from history, there are two institutions that have contributed significantly to the development of mankind. It's universities and the church. Don't be surprised that we are dressed like priests when we walk in here. It comes from the church. So churches and universities have been very, very important. In fact, Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Again, it echoes, I think, what Z.K. Matthews had in mind. But Matthews had this vision long before many people, because in Africa, this whole issue of education arose post-independence. Matthews had already, I think, began to grapple with this around 1936, 1940, when he came to Fort Hare to say, how can we change education? And he distinguished between westernization and education, because I think all societies have a form of education. It shouldn't be European. So this concept that he called Africanization, it's something that we should respect. It's something he pioneered. Matthews believed that Western and Eastern systems of education were not sufficiently constructed in terms of their curriculum to meet the needs of the African people. He didn't say they are bad. He said that they are constructed in a particular way, in a particular worldview, and they don't necessarily suit the circumstances and the conditions in which I think African people live. I quote him, he said, "Gone are the days when Africans were satisfied to learn all about the capitals of the world, the capes, the peninsulas of Europe and America, while they remained ignorant of the rivers that flow through their own villages, or the mountains from the village where the village was situated." So you went out, as you all know, you went out all to recite the daffodils, and most of you had never seen a daffodil in your background or in your gardens. Or you went to recite Westminster's Bridge. Some of you had never seen what Westminster's Bridge is, but nevertheless, you sang it and just reproduced it. That's what was happening with Z.K. Matthews. Let me, as I say, this issue of Africanization is one of the most important things that he laid the groundwork and he pioneered through this. His view or his concept of Africanization was transformative, it was broad, it was forward-looking, it was inclusive, and it was based on excellence and quality. It was not based on simply the lowering of standard, as is often the case. So let me quote Minister Pandor again. She said, yes, he strongly believed in African imprint on higher education and on all levels of education. His essential thesis was of excellence in higher education and firm belief that Africans could create and lead institutions that would offer the best of students and eventually service the community of South Africa. These ideas were somewhat very similar to those of W. Du Bois' arguments in his excellent essay, The Talented Tenth. I want to now have my last 2 points. This point is the one that is most controversial, and I want to deal with it clinically like a typical doctor. The political Z.K. Matthews, who was the originator and the initiator of the idea of the Congress of the People and the Freedom Charter. Professor Z.K. Matthews was forced to return to South Africa from the USA as his passport could not be extended. He returned home in May 1953. Apparently, the idea of the Congress of the People arose in Z.K.'s mind in 1952, 1953, whilst he was teaching at the Union Theological Seminar in New York. This was written by Professor Simon. So he didn't require what people call collective responsibility for the idea to arise. It arose to him when he was far away maybe from the problems of South Africa. But he saw this and said, this is something that I need to take in the usual process that we have. But the idea was nevertheless his. So Mrs. Matthews remembers vividly, and she writes that word vividly, when Professor Z.K. Matthews and his family first mooted the idea of the Congress of the People of South Africa. It was lunchtime in their house, Puting, here in Alice. Some of you might know the place. It would have been between June and August, and I say it's between June and August because in August, Professor Matthews delivered his address to the Cape Congress, ANC Congress, about this proposal. So he started at home, he saw the vision in the US, came home, had a debate with Joe and his other kids, and they were all excited. In fact, they even thought that, this Congress should be held in Tabanchu because Dr. Moroka then had a big farm there, and they could go and relax and pitch up a tent and see things that way. But this was based on the idea that ZK had, that black people in South Africa and white people are complementary to each other. They have together developed the country, and they should live together in an equal, non-racial fashion. So that is where I think it came from. It was based on equality, respect for dignity, respect for human rights, and he wanted that, I think, to be taken up at the Congress of the People. So various other authorities quote Matthews in different ways because he believed that a dramatic new initiative was needed from Africans at the time because, the white people were doing what they liked at the time, and it was getting worse. So he proposed this, that people should meet and draw up the Freedom Charter for a democratic South Africa of the future. That was the idea that I want to expand about. He, in February 1957, I think he was already in the treason trial, he wrote to his wife that when their house was raided in 1955, his Craddock presidential address, of which he had several copies, including my original draft in my own handwriting, which represented the memorandum of the Congress of the People, and my presidential address in 1955 were all seized by the security police of the time. In January 1958, he again wrote to his wife when the defense lawyers were analyzing the government's case against Z.K. Matthews, which will be the main case of the treason trial. And this was because of the origin of the Congress of the People's paper. Anthony Simpson, who is Mandela's biographer, writes as follows: the originator of the Freedom Charter was neither a communist nor a militant, but a conservative elder statesman of the ANC, Z.K. Matthews. So that's how it is captured. Mandela actually later commented that Matthews, who he had criticized with the members of the ANC Youth League as a fence-sitter, should have conceived this dynamic idea, which became the vortex of our aspirations. Similar, in his words, similar to the founding of the ANC in 1912. That is also captured there. I think the point I'm trying to make here, ladies and gentlemen, Vice Chancellor and others, is to say that there is plenty of evidence, if you are truthful to history, that these ideas that we're talking about were the ideas of Z.K. Matthews and no one else. But as you know, I think there are processes in any organization, and he took those processes. And when he took those processes, I think people started to appropriate these ideas to themselves in different ways. And I have, from what I've read, the only logical conclusion one can arrive at from all the evidence I'm presenting is that Z.K. Matthews should receive the due and full recognition for conceptualizing these ideas of the Congress of the People, for drafting the memorandum of the freedom of the Charter, for collecting and synthesizing the freedom of demands of the people, and for being the driving force behind the People's Congress and the Freedom Charter. So that's where I want to leave it. But I want to say this. I'm glad I'm speaking to academics here and not politicians, although there may be politicians here. In academic and scholarly traditions and circles, those that conceive, create, or originate ideas or concepts or theories receive the full credit and recognition for those ideas. It is almost unheard of that drafters and collaborators and people who can just jump on the bandwagon as the train is moving, important as they may be as part of a movement, should ever take precedence over the originator of an innovative ideas. Clearly, these drafters of the Freedom Charter took advantage of Professor Matthews' character, as I've already described it. He was never going to enforce himself on this. I then says, these unethical omissions must be rectified publicly and through a proper process, because it's not. And the University of Fort Hare, I think the University of Fort Hare is perfectly placed to start such a process. Again, I want to compliment you for continuing to recognize Z.K. Matthews in the manner that you are doing. But this character is better than we are doing. He is one of us. He is a giant in the world. Let's remember that when he died in Washington, Lyndon Johnson, the president of the US, gave up his Air Force One plane to transport the remains of Z.K. Matthews to Botswana. It doesn't come that cheap and that easy for an American president to recognize somebody in that way out of respect and honor. I mean, if you think about it in history, it has never existed except for Z.K. Matthews. Here we are in South Africa. We recognize every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And the people who are supposed to recognize, we just ignore as if they never existed amongst us. I think we must ask questions around this issue. So the last part of my speech, which I think is a little bit long, but it is the part that really hurt me the most, but I also think it's maybe the most important contribution I can make, is I have entitled it, Z.K. Matthews, the forgotten, localized, or regional intellectual leader of our struggle. That's how I've. If one looked at the history of our struggle, one is struck by the following. It seems our struggle only started post-1994 or in 1960. You know, people don't recognize anything before that. It is also characterized by the absence or minimal mention of other liberation movements in the struggle and the selective memory or forgetfulness of who did or memorialized in the struggle. Out of this comes a distorted version of history of where we came from. The current generation has hardly heard of Reverend Kalata. Does anybody know Reverend Kalata here? I'm sure it's very few of you know him. Has anybody know of Reverend Kawe, who was here? Does anybody remember Godfrey Piche, who was president of the here at Fort Hare? We hardly remember that. So the contributions of people like Godfrey Piche, Professor Z.K. Matthews, hardly exist in the memory of generations of South Africans. I'm not saying that there are not many other people we know, but really I think we have to analyze things properly. The contribution of, their contributions are difficult to find anywhere. They sit in archives. Many people in South Africa go to archives. Very few. Nobody goes to archives. But if you write books about anybody, people will read about this person and will know about it. Professor Matthews' contributions are recognized through his annual lecture here at the University of Fort Hare, the Matthews House, which is called Puting, because I think they belong to the Puti clan in Alice, and the university's exhibition in the administration building or the Documentation Center at UNISA. In general, Z.K. Matthews' contributions are regionalized to Alice or the Eastern Cape for a national figure of Professor Matthews' stature. His seminal intellectual contributions that impacted the globe and generations and defined the so-called New World Order and transformed culture, policies, values, and perspective remain downplayed in his own country. In his own country, I emphasize. His so-called biography, Freedom for My People, which I think the program director quoted, is deemed by several peers to be an incomplete biography. It's incomplete and does not do justice to his enormous and immense contributions. In fact, one scholar described it as that Z.K. Matthews, because of his character, said very little about all that he did, because the nature of the person was not to praise himself, didn't want to boast, but another person who could have written the biography could have written it slightly differently. The biography was incomplete and lacked details, but was completed also by Monica Wilson, who was a family friend of the Matthews and a colleague anthropologist. She added a few chapters to that autobiography or alleged autobiography and approached the biography from a liberal Christian perspective because she was a very religious person who grew up. In a similar vein as Professor Willem Simon's long essay, which I think were their strength. Monica Wilson portrayed Professor Matthews in religious terms, in terms of being a Christian reconciler, which I think a major failure of Professor Matthews' contribution. Dr. Rasool, in his PhD at the University of Western Cape, said as follows: others have argued that there has been a proliferation in the production of political biography, popular, scholarly, in the years after apartheid. Political biographies have tended to focus on prominent figures in the struggle for the liberation of Black South Africans from segregation and apartheid. If one considered the broader historiography of memorialization in the post-apartheid period, one finds that names of certain heroes appear again and again. Names like Albert Luthuli, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Govan Mbeki, Walter Sisulu. Most recently, you find biographies of contemporary leaders of the ANC, including Thabo Mbeki, Kgalema Motlanthe, Jacob Zuma, Cyril Ramaphosa, and many others, including even Pipe. ZK does not appear at all in this list. His full biography is yet to be written for popular reading. In more popular publications, he is usually forgotten. This is, I quote from this PhD student. Having heard about this, I came across a book entitled Unity in Diversity, 100 Years of ANC Leadership, 1912 to 2012. I'm sure you all, in 2012, we're celebrating a century of the ANC. I looked for this book everywhere. I went to the National Library in Pretoria. They told me that the only copy that's available is in Cape Town. Now, they knew I wouldn't go to Cape Town. So I went to many bookshops. I couldn't find it. Ultimately, the University of Pretoria Library said to me they've got one copy. And I dashed out, took my car, and drove to Pretoria and requested that I be given this book and to peruse it. It's got about 319 pages. It's got 14 chapters. It's edited by Renee Skuman and Darrell Swanepoel. And it marked this century. Of course, it lists the national presidents of them, from John Dube to Jacob Zuma at the time when this was happening. But it also lists other national leaders. They are called others. And in these others, these other leaders, it includes Winnie Mandela, Chris Hani, Joe Slovo, Lilian Ngoni, Alfred Nzo, Solomon Mahlangu, and Reverend James Kalata, Trevor Huddleston, and Joseph, and many others who played leadership role in the ANC. Remember that ZK joined the ANC in 1940 and became an NEC member in 1943. From that time, from 1940 up to his death, he was a member and a senior person within the ANC. However, this is very interesting. That holds now the archives does not appear in that book. Which university appears? Wits. I'm not anti-Wits, but it just shows how, how we do things in South Africa. Wits appears prominently. I'm asking myself, here you have a man who has dedicated his life, 1940 to almost his death, who has been the president of the ANC in the Cape, who sometimes deputized for Albert Luther. He was imprisoned. And then you write about the history. You even write about the Congress of the People. You write about the Freedom Charter. You don't mention him. I think we must have our heads examined. That's all I can say. And you have books written about him that he's a man of Istunzi. So this is a concern, I think, that we must address as institutions of higher learning, because we have got autonomy and independence and the freedom, I think, to be dispassionate about the way we write history. We must not write politicized, which is what I can now say without a shadow of doubt. I can go to the High Court for this to defend it. I think the history as it's captured now, that has almost left Z.K. Matthews about this history is jaundiced, I think, in medical terms. So I don't believe that his role should be downplayed. So in conclusion, Mr. Vice Chancellor and audience, the Constitution of this country is based on the Freedom Charter that arose out of the Congress of the People, the demands of the people. This Freedom Charter was approved in 1955, and in 1996 we wrote the Constitution of the Republic, which is based on the Freedom Charter. In 2012, I happened to have been a member of the National Planning Commission. The introduction of the NDP is based on the Freedom Charter. But in all of these documents, we don't recognize the person whose idea it was to bring this to our attention. We don't. We just pretend like, like manna, it has come from heaven. So Z.K. Matthews was a polymath in his contributions. He saw that which many of his peers didn't see. He articulated, he had clarity of thought. And finally, I just want to request that the University of Fort Hare finds a process to memorialize Professor Z properly, globally, and publicly. Let us celebrate this African intellectual pioneer and brag about him. Let us create a national moment, or a day, or a monument, or a statue to remember and reflect upon what this unique and exceptional African has contributed to the advancements of humankind globally and to our own advancement as South African. I think we have to be proud of that. I had an auntie, my mother's younger sister, who said, Poki, if you don't praise yourself, nobody will. I mean, which was very funny, but I learned that sometimes people take advantage of you because I think you're quiet and you are a backroom person, and I think one has to balance this. But remember that we should be reflecting on him rather than he reflecting on himself. So I recommend that Professor Z.K. Matthews, as our national treasure, be given his due recognition and true stature in our history and celebrated nationally, proudly, and publicly, as I've said before. Let us accept and recognize that only he, the academic, was the originator and initiator of the Congress of the People, the Freedom Charter, and the total transformation of education through Africanization. As I've said before, like all of us, Professor Matthews was created in the image of God. Like all of us, he was biologically unique, with a permutation of unique phenotypical characteristics of intellect, foresight, humility, mathematical bent, clarity of thought, strength of character, with unshakable focus and belief in his vision, his love for music, for languages, and for nature. And not the combination, unlike no other, is what distinguished Professor Z.K. Matthews. Lord Caradon described Z.K. Matthews as a person, I quote, blessed with fine and rare personal qualities. He said this at the memorial service of ZK. Mr. Vice Chancellor, Program Director, this is all that I have to say. I hope that it has provoked some thinking and will set a trend of thought that may be different, I think, from the political way, I think, in which I think the story of Z.K. Matthews has been handled. And let's think about these sort of things, as I say, as institutions that subscribe to academic freedom, to university autonomy, and clarity of writing and thinking without being wedded to certain political machinations. And we just become forthright, stick to the truth, and to the analysis. I mean, the information here is very simple. It's all over, couched in a manner that you have to sit and put it together and see the clarity through it. Because you can easily assume that, Z.K. Matthews was a politician. Of course, he did participate a lot in politics, but his whole life was that of an intellectual, a scholar, an academic, and that's how he could come up with ideas. On that note, I want to thank all of you for listening to me for such a long time, but I hope that I've given you some food for thought.
Thank you, Professor Mokgoba, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I won't dissect Professor Mokgoba's speech. He has sounded the call. It's up to you as academics at Forte to do something about the call. Thank you for sharing your expertise, your experiences, your research, and for drawing parallels between Professor Z.K. Matthews' life, your life, and of course, our UFH context. Yeah, though the are different, institutional contexts are different, but there is, however, convergence of issues and agendas, particularly those that relate to leadership and transformation. So this address surely has the most remarkable lessons for UFH's decade of renewal project. Ladies and gentlemen, now before moving on to the next item, I would like to call upon Professor Mokgoba and the wife, as well as the Vice Chancellor, to do a presentation of our token of appreciation as the institution. Institutional advancement, are you ready? Because I would like to call upon Professor Makgoba, the wife, and the Vice Chancellor to come forward for the presentation. Thank you. What is going to happen after that is that immediately after the presentation, I will invite Dr. Imba, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, to come and lead the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Nkongi. This part is the easiest part, also the most beautiful part too. So, as a gesture and a way of expressing gratitude, we're going to present Professor Makgoba and family with a gift. And this gift, I must say it now, there's a young student here. His name is Luto, but Luto was not able to come and be part of presenting to Professor Makgoba. But I just want him to be acknowledged as the person who prepared this gift. Now, you must be wondering what gift this is. And so let's show you now. Okay, then I have another gift for Ms. Advocate Naledi, and this is it here. I don't know what's inside.
Thanks again, Professor Makgoba, for this inspiring lecture. I think I picked quite a number of very important highlights from the life of Professor Z.K. Matthews. We normally hold these lectures every year, and each and every year I learn something from his life. And today, I think when I was just thinking about just 3 words that I can take from your presentation, from your lecture, out of this great life of Professor Z.K. Matthews, I just thought he was a trailblazer, a futuristic leader. And I just remembered the quotation that you highlighted, that he was an academic scholar with a social conscience. So I think I'll take that with me. There was just so much that one can learn from his life. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for questions and answers. I thought there would be a chair here so that Professor Makgoba could sit and take questions. We'll do it this way. I'll take a couple of hands, definitely not more than 4 at a time, and then allow Professor Makgoba to respond, and then we'll have another round. Any takers? There should be mics. Now is the time. It comes once in a lifetime where you have a leader of this caliber in your midst. So, yes, Professor Roos, there's a hand there. Yes, I need at least 4. 4 should be fine, Prof. Yes. Okay, any other hand? Yes, I see a hand here. So the roving mics should be very close. So there's Prof. Roos here. There's another hand there and another one here. Okay, let's do those for now. Professor Roos, you're on the floor. Can we get a roving mic for him, please?
Thank you very much, sir, for an absolutely marvelous bit of history. And I was so taken at how you weave genealogy, circulations into this intellectual history of Z.K. Matthews. And I've got a quick comment and then a question. A comment in the beginning, you connect him to Robeson, you connect him to W.E.B. Du Bois, you connect him to Biko. And I think it's noteworthy how, to this day even, globally, major black scholars that are seen as historical figures rather than contributors to global thinking and theory. Biko, for instance, yes, we all know his role about politics, but he shaped political theory in some major ways. And that leads to my question about Z.K. Matthews' role, sir, in the Congress of the People. And he was an anthropologist, and sorry, let me talk here so I'm not making you twist your neck. And then shortly, he gives that we develops those ideas not very long after Gluckman has given the Bridge paper, which blows anthropology out the water. It says we can't have these tribes and nations and so on, that people interact. So I'm wondering how, in your opinion, whether, and your research, because it's meticulous, and it's really, I take my, well, we have taken my hat off, but I kept my hat to you. I wonder if in your reading, if you think that Matthews had been influenced by the kind of breakthroughs which Gluckman had made, and then later on, some of the major 1960s thinkers in the country, and I'm thinking particularly of the two from my hometown, Biko and Turner, how the extent to which they were influenced by Z.K. Matthews' thinking, because it's suggested in your talk, but it's nowhere in any of the historical literature. And again, thank you, sir, for a tour de force.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ross. We will now have another question. If you can please stand up so that they give you a mic. And please introduce yourself, the faculty where you come from.
Am I audible? Okay. Afternoon to the public at large. My name is Daniel. I represent the Department of Public Administration. And I have a question directed to Doctor. So we have seen some knowledge production on IKS, Indigenous Knowledge Systems, but we have more Western people, more Western scholars from Stanford, Oxford, Kent, who are producing more knowledge on African studies. And we don't have actual African people who are propagating African studies. So does this shine a light on the absence of African scholars in the scene, or is it more of a sort of shame from African people in propagating their identity to the world? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, please come through.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Katlon Putlani. I'm from the Faculty of Management and Commerce. I have a question for Prof. Makgoba. I have to say the presentation for me, it was, he mentioned some of the things that really caught my eye. One of the things that he mentioned, that Dr. Naledi Pandor, that is the granddaughter of Dr. Z.K. Matthews, and Dr. Naledi Pandor is one of the people that I personally idolize, especially on her latest comments. We know that South Africa was under the spotlight based on geopolitics, that South Africa stands based on the war that is happening between Ukraine and Russia, and latest one being the Israel war on Gaza, and in her comments that she has been saying. So for me, those things, when he mentioned them, they didn't come as a surprise that she is the granddaughter of Z.K. Matthews. So for me, my question towards him is that how can we harness the legacy of Z.K. Matthews to cultivate the next generation of leaders? Because in this time, I believe that we still need leaders like Z.K. Matthews. In fact, we need them more than any other time. So I want him to answer me that how can we harness this new generation of leaders so that we have more people like Dr. Z.K. Matthews. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katlego. We are going to take the last question here, and then I will ask Ntate Makgoba to please come up and respond to those four. Yes.
Good day. I'm Sfingo Mbona. I'm trying to imagine the kind of interaction that Prof. Matthews will have with the traditional authorities since Alice, since at the time the Alice area was a part of a tribal council and a traditional authority. What kind of a relationship did he have with the local traditional leadership, or did he have any interactions and further with the traditional council? Trying to imagine that kind of relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now allow Professor Makgoba to respond, and then we'll have another round of questions.
It's fine. Ladies and gentlemen, it's fine. Let's air whatever we need to air when we're all here. I will start with the last question. Actually, when you read through Professor Matthews' sort of remembrance book by his wife, you will realize that he was very popular here in the Eastern Cape. In fact, he got the highest votes when he was elected. What does that tell you? It tells that he was a man of the people, a man on the ground. And I think his wife often laughs at him that although he spoke fluent Xhosa, he often struggled with the clicks and the gutterings. You know how Xhosas pronounce certain things. So other than that, I think he worked very well within the societies where he existed and lived, and he was highly respected by traditional people, by ordinary people, as is captured, I think, in many other readings that you will find. The other one is how can we reproduce or encourage people to be, I think, like Z.K. Matthews. This was the penultimate question. I think the Vice Chancellor has often said here when he spoke that I think young students of today should try and read and familiarize themselves with Z.K. Matthews. But it's often easier when the person that you are trying to emulate is also exists in the minds of ordinary people. And the best way to do that, I think, is to write proper biographies of an individual. I mean, most people still read about Mandela because biographies have been produced about him. And they are produced by authorities and so forth. The other one I suggested was that I think a university such as Fort Hare, as part of its renewal, should begin a process to identify these giants that have passed through this institution, Robert Sobukwe, one of them, and a few others that I may not know, and Z.K. Matthews, and begin to memorialize them in a way that is not only located here at the university. I mean, let me give you an example. All of you knew Professor Tobias, and Wits bragged about him because of, I think, his seminal findings in the origins of mankind. All of you knew of Professor Christian Barnard. The University of Cape Town bragged about him because of what I would call an accident that he performed the first heart transplant. I call it an accident because he knew that somebody else, somewhere else was going to do it, and he rushed everybody and even broke ethical rules so that he was the first. Now, once he became the first, people forgot the ethics of what should have happened. But that's another story. I don't want to sound sour grapes. So each institution must find these kinds of people to brag about. And I don't know whether you can find anyone better than Z.K. Matthews, because he has done something that we will live with forever. Our constitution is based on his ideas. Now, why would an institution not recognize ideas of a scholar, of their own teaching, and a scholar who was an academic in their own institution? So I think that would be my answer to that question, that I think it's not simply a question of people emulating, but it's a question of the institution to have his name and his presence amongst people to be able to be remembered all the time. That's the only way you do it. In terms of IKS, why are there so many Western people and not African people? You know, I don't know how many of you understand Pedi, but I'll try and express it in my mother tongue. In Pedi, there is a proverb that says, it means to be sometimes, because the world is competitive, and we compete all the time, sometimes to be recognized, you have to shout a little bit. In my previous life, I worked at a hospital called the Hammersmith Hospital, the most competitive hospital you could find in the Commonwealth. And we were told that at the Hammersmith, you can be quiet for the whole year. But once in that year, you must roar like a lion so that everybody knows your territory. If you don't do that, you will disappear and people will just run over your head. So sometimes I think knowledge that belongs to us we let other people take it away from us. We don't write our own history, we don't write our own experiences. In fact, you can make a big story. Who knows more about Mandela than Anthony Simpson? And Anthony Simpson is he's a British author, a British journalist. Why couldn't we have someone here study Mandela, study Walter Sisulu, or study Govan Mbeki, and study Biko, and so forth, and write about them so that it's authentic. These are people that you, with them in the trenches, you were there in Mzabalazo, wherever you were, but you understand what was driving them. I mean, Anthony Simpson can only write like an English person. And I've often said, you know, having lived in England for a very long time, English people are very good at writing history. They've written about the history of the world, but there's no black person who has ever written a history of the English people. They won't read it. Because they are proud and they know where they come from. They are not going to allow that to happen. I mean, you've got many historians that are, you know, African in the UK. They will never write the history of the British. But we, you know, when somebody comes from England and speaks with a Polish accent like a potato under their tongue, and they say, can I write your history? You give them the license to do so. So there is something about that it's of our own making rather than anything wrong. I think the first question was very interesting. You know, it spoke about these black intellectuals that have shaped history as great people. But remember, when Steve Biko was speaking about his ideas, the whites of this country thought he was a troublemaker. Z.K. Matthews, when he was speaking about his idea, he was a troublemaker. So black people have had to deal with this troublemaking, and then when they are gone, they get eulogized or something like that. So this is a very big issue. But to answer the question that you asked, you know, there is somewhere where Z.K. Matthews said that it was important, I think, for educational institutions to study human relations and human interactions so that we can do a scientific study to see how different peoples of different cultures can live together. So that tells you where he was coming from. I don't know where he got that from, but that was an important thing, that it was, although he couldn't get rid of African studies, he would prefer to have had a course where these human relations are studied scientifically. Whether Rick Tanner and Steve Biko borrowed some things from him, I've never seen that, but as I say, all I can say is that they seem to have similar characteristics. Like maybe I could have also added Martin Luther King Jr., I could have added Gandhi. So there are a few of these people in the world that sprout in different parts of the world. I hope that answers your question. But the most important thing is to remember, black people have always been the problem. It has never been the other way around. In our own country, we are the problem. And it's not us who say we are the problem. It's other people. And I think we have to be very careful about that. Well, let's take another round.
Thank you very much, Ntate Makgoba. I think the point that you're emphasizing around, and also raised by one of the people who asked questions of writing our own stories, highlights the importance of perspective. It reminds me of the saying that goes, for as long as the stories of the jungle are written by the hunter, they will always glorify the hunter. So we need to write our own stories so that history is told from our own perspective. We are now going to take another round, which will be the last round of questions. Your last opportunity, I see a hand here. Another one here. Then there's another one there. Okay, I may take one last. So let's start here.
Greetings to everyone. My name is Naledi Pandor. I'm from the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities. I was kind of questioning whether I should ask this question or not because like all the questions were super hard, like, you know, the vocabulary, but I'm gonna ask it anyways. It's based on the political landscape right now, the political battlefield actually, because the reason why I say it's a political battlefield is that other political parties are trying to attack a specific political party in order to eliminate the political party. So it's not trying to win the people, but really trying to eliminate this one big party. So my question is based on ZK Matthews and what would his opinion be based on the current political battlefield that is going on right now. And I know that you'll never know exactly what ZK Matthews would say, what he would think, because you're not ZK Matthews. But based on the qualitative research that you've shared in your speech, based on the interviews that you've conducted with the family members, so the answer, I kind of think it will be based with your own perception of what he would say, and also your opinion of based on what you view ZK Matthews. So my question is based on that. What do you think he would say rather than, on the political battlefield? And also another question is, would he still choose ANC or would he choose another political party?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. We have another one here. Yes.
Good afternoon, Doc. I'm Ruben Hare. I'm a theologian from social sciences. I think, Prof, you have answered some of my questions. I've been waiting for you to talk about ZK Matthews' spirituality. And you have mentioned that. I've said this to one of my colleagues that this is one thing that I want to take from this lecture of ZK Matthews. Now, look, you mentioned that he's been very much involved with interreligious communities. He did not only work with religious communities in South Africa and Africa, all Africa Council of Churches, as well as the World Council of Churches. And I want to believe that he was also a moralist. His politics was shaped by, and leadership was shaped by his ethical moral values. How would he feel today when he sees that there are no more ethical moral values within our leaders? And we can also look at the whole issue of corruption and religious intolerances in our communities. So my question is, what can we learn from ZK Matthews' ethical moral values as the Forte community? Not only his political and educational contributions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There is another hand there at the back. Can you please stand up so that they see you? Yes.
I want to make a comment on what Prof said. I'm doing, I'm supposed to introduce myself. I'm in the Department of Management and Commerce. You're in the Faculty of Management and Commerce and in the Department of Development Studies. My research is on the ZK Matthews House, and when I went there in terms of collecting my data, I saw the condition it was in, and Prof said that we should honor him and do everything we can to make him known because of the kind of contribution he has done. but the house is in such a state, and it's so bad that you cannot even take tourists there. So I also want to make this challenge to the University of Fort Hare, since they're stating that this is the year for ZK Matthews to actually do something about the house, because he deserves that honor.
Thank you very much. You are raising a very important point, and I think the VC has been talking about that, so I think it's a take home. Let me take one last question. But I don't see your hands. Huh? Okay, let's take those two, and then I'll raise a hand this side. I don't see them. Yeah. Oh, okay, there. Come. Okay. Okay, let's do this two, and then we'll take those hands there at the back.
Greetings to everyone in the house. My name is Ambe Sabala, and I'm from the Faculty of Education. So my question is based on what Prof said, that ZK Matthews was a pioneer for an African-centered curriculum, or rather, he said that ZK Matthews believed that the curriculum that is offered to students is of Western morals, or rather it is westernized, and it is not conducive for African students. So he even made an example of a poem that is taught to students, the Westminster Bridge poem, instead of learning about rivers that are actually like in our country. So my question is, I actually want your opinion in this, but looking at it through the lens of ZK Matthews' principles, what recommendations would you make, noting that you are looking at it through the lens of the principles of ZK Matthews? What recommendations would you make to the institution, or rather to South African institutions, on how they could actually transform their current curriculum to actually accommodate African students? Because we believe that these institutions are for us. So now if the curriculum does not cater for us, or rather does not relate to us, I think you heard my question.
Thank you very much. Let's take the gentleman next to her, and then we'll move this side.
Molweni, igama lami ngu-Anandis. I'm from the Faculty of Science and Agriculture. Prof mentioned a thing of the Freedom Charter, ne? And he said, but constitution ne, is okay. From the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, there's a part saying, "Bana, we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, and we honor those who have suffered for justice and freedom in our land." Now, my question is that, Bana, how are we like honoring ZK Matthews? Because you'll find out that, Bana, there are leaders like Nelson Mandela. Like, if you ask like like go ZK Matthews, I saw that much about ZK Matthews. But if you ask about Nelson Mandela, they know Nelson Mandela. Like how can we teach abantwana abasakhulayo? Because in future yethu ngabantwana abancinci. How can we teach abantwana abasakhulayo ngenantsika like the foundation yenantsika yethu le ye history yethu? Because ZK Matthews was the one behind the Freedom Charter, and the following like constitutions and all came after the Freedom Charter. I think
Thank you very much. We'll now come to this side. I think I saw two hands. Please raise your hands again. At the back there, yeah. So we'll just take those two, and I think that will be a wrap-up of the session. Okay.
Greetings to the professors, everyone at the house, and a special greetings to the SRC, my colleagues at the back. This is Lisondiki, the SRC residence officer. and also from the Faculty of Management and Commerce. Mine is small. It's not a question per se, but a special request. I am taking advantage of this opportunity since the Vice Chancellor is here, the DVCs, and also the residence manager particularly. We do have a residences named by the name of Professor Z.K. Matthews. I think it's 4 buildings. And at the state of the residences, I think it is time, since it is the year of Z.K. Matthews, we advance them in honor of Prof. Z.K. Matthews, take them and make them to be the standard, if I may say, to be at the same standard as residences in metros, if that's possible. But I am pleading and begging that in honor of Professor Z.K. Matthews, we do renovate and make those residences be significant and one of the best residences of UFH Alice campus. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll have maybe one last question. It's done. Okay, wonderful. Thanks again for the questions. I will now ask Professor Makgoba to respond. I think that will be the last session.
Thank you. Thank you for all the questions, and I will just take them not in order of how they have come. I think the first one dealt with the issue of westernized curriculum and so forth. Let me emphasize again, the world is interconnected, and there is no way you can live like a hermit and not understand what's happened in China or what's happening. So I think Professor Matthews recognized that. He was not anti-Western. He was saying that there are things here that we can do because there is a knowledge base that we have here. When I said that, people recite the daffodils, I actually meant it because if you have never seen something in your existence, how do you actually connect it as a form of knowledge that makes you understand better? All you do is you have learned it like a robot. But every time you come here to the Eastern Cape, there are often imbongi here. They give you information about the traditions and the culture of these people here. Now, do we ever take them seriously and write what they do and teach our children about what they do? We don't. Whose knowledge is that? When President Mbeki came into power, he created a new form of national orders that were based on the history of our countries and the heroes of our country. Okay? When we were at UKZN, we didn't sing this song that I heard when I came in here, this Latin song, because none of us spoke Latin. So we asked musicians within the province of KZN to design a new graduation song that could be relating to the people there. Okay? Another one I'll tell you, when I was there at the university, African students used to say, when they have failed their exam, that it's because they were seeing tokoloshi. You know what tokoloshi is? Now, I mean, there's nothing wrong. It's part of our culture. Now, if you took an African child who has seen tokoloshi and you take them to a psychiatrist or to a psychologist, they get certified that they are mentally sick. Okay? If you call a traditional healer to come there and come and speak to this child, they will reveal other things about the family history and the relationships, and they may want them to slaughter a red chicken or a cow or a cattle, and after that they are normal. So that kind of thing, you won't do it in England, because in England you'll just simply be taken to a hospital and you'll be certified and gone you are, and you will never find a job easily anywhere. So at UKZN, we actually employed a traditional healer to deal with all these people that we're seeing, these tuberculosis, and see whether when they've been cured from the tuberculosis, they would be able to perform. And without exception, once they've gone through the rituals, they performed, but they never had records that these are mentally ill people that should be certified. So you can do these kinds of things like that in order to deal with the issue of with your curriculum, because every society, every tradition has got knowledge, and part of the reason why we introduced Zulu in KZN, and it was introduced by Professor Renuka Vital, was because we asked ourselves, how do you actually get to the bottom of knowledge? Through translation rather than through speaking the language of the people and understanding them, what they mean in their expressions, in their idioms, and so forth. So we introduced isiZulu as a thing. So you can do all these kinds of things, and of course, this is a moving train. The other question that speaks about the house of the Matthews being in a bad state. Look, some of us have been reading about what's happening here at Fort Hare and what's going on, and you must ask yourself, where would the Vice Chancellor get money when there are people in this part of our country siphoning money out of the university? I mean, you've got to ask these questions. How would the Vice Chancellor restore things when money is being siphoned at the back and it's being threatened? So I think it's not a simple thing, but I think you must look into, your own system and so forth and deal with that. In terms of the religious question, I actually forgot. I wanted to read this to you about Professor Matthews. I spoke to Professor Panipichana, and I hope you recognize that he's a priest. Occasionally when he's not doing other things. So, and he was a founder member of SASO in my days, and he's one of the people that I sometimes speak to. And he says to me, and I'm just going to read it here, he said, he remembered Z.K. Matthews coming to Lovedale College in 1960 on the invitation of the student Christian movement. And then he says, Z.K. was a man of dignity. Again, that word is tunes. Revered and highly respected. He had resigned from Fort Hare College when the apartheid government turned a prestigious university into a Xhosa Bantustan university. As young students, we relished, hanging around Z.K. because apparently his legal offices were opposite a restaurant in Alice, where I think people used to hang around, and they would wait for him when he's coming down of the office to go and hang around him and talk to him. He spoke to the students on the importance of joining public life as a Christian. This is where I come to your question. He emphasized that one could not enter public life as a Christian and behave like Tom, Dick, and Harry. There was meaning to joining public life as a Christian. There was a responsibility in joining public life as a Christian. And there were also penalties that you would suffer by joining public life as a Christian. He said, one had to respect and carry the Christian values into this public life. And his final word was that this has stayed with me for the rest of my life. Now, I'm not sure that a matriculant listening to this at that age may not have influenced him to become a priest. I'm just speculating, because this is one thing that he remembers now in adulthood that has stayed with him from Professor Matthews. I hope that it addresses your questions. What would he think of today's society? I mean, I think all of us, I think in South Africa, irrespective of where we are tired of corruption, and we would want the quickest way to get rid of it. But remember that like thugs everywhere or thieves everywhere, they are always ahead of us, and they do other things. So we have to play a catch-up game, but there is nobody who approves these kinds of things, irrespective of where they come from, unless the people who are doing it. So I would just leave it at that point, yeah. The other one was we should honor, I think, ZK Matthews. I have no qualms about that. I think I would definitely agree with that. The thing about young people, you know, you've got to travel to a place like Cuba or to the former Eastern blocs of the Soviet Union. And you would be surprised as to how young kids know their history, they know their heroes, and they can tell you when this hero came about and what did this hero do. In South Africa, what we do is we go and steal money from the public, and then we take our children to schools that don't teach them anything about our history, and we expect them to become people of a particular type. I mean, I don't teach my children anything about my history, but I expect them to remember who they are. How do they know who they are if I don't teach them? Because when they're at school, they get other influences, but the home, remember, is the first school. The first class of school is not where you take your children, is at home. We all learned basic values being at home, going to Sunday school, whether you believed it or not, or going to see a traditional healer. All of these things make who you are. But we don't do that. What we prefer to do is, during the day, when we are with other people that we think are sophisticated, I don't care about traditional healers. But at night or over the weekend, where do you go? You go and look for one. You call them. So I think there are certain things I think we have to learn about ourselves that are quite important. What would ZK? Would ZK vote for another party? I doubt. I think ZK had committed himself to the ANC. He worked for them. He was honorable, and he did what he could do. He played his part. And I don't think that the circumstances of today would have changed which party he would go to. I mean, he may be concerned, like many people, I think, within the movement are concerned, but I don't think being concerned is synonymous to running away unless you have a real good reason to do so. And I doubt that he would have done so in the current circumstances. I'm not sure if there is anything else that I've left. If anybody's questions I haven't answered. Thank you.
Okay. Another warm round of applause for Professor Makgoba. And I wish to thank everyone who contributed through questions, and most importantly, Professor Makgoba for attending to each and every one of those questions that were asked. We have now reached the end of the Q&A session. Over to you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mjimba. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, towards the end of our program, we've gone way beyond time. So what I'll do now is to ask Ms. Mkambela, an artist, to come and offer us a rendition, after which Professor Renuka Vital, the TVC Teaching and Learning, will come and present a vote of thanks and some other remarks. But I must state that Advancement has informed me that after the vote of thanks and the closing remarks, the national anthem will be sung, after which lunch will be served. Those with blue pens will have lunch served at the staff center, and those with yellow pens will remain here and will have their lunch here. So with those words, a rendition, and thereafter a vote of thanks, and then the national anthem. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to everyone. I know it's been a long day, but thank you very much for being here today. I want to start by, first of all, thanking Professor Makgoba. You have really exceeded our expectations. I want to thank you especially for how you have demonstrated the thoroughness, the extent of the research that you've done, just the way the gaps and spaces you've identified for us as a university to take forward and for us as a country to take forward. Please join me in giving a big round of applause for this wonderful lecture we had. The one thing you can always count on with Professor Makgoba is that he will really tell it as it is and tell it as he sees it. And I think not only was his lecture so insightful, but most importantly, I think it has been instructive, and I do hope every student and academic who's here has left with something they could do to extend and respond to the call that he's made to us today. So thank you for that. Then, of course, I want to thank all of the Z.K. Matthews family, all the members that are here. Minister Pandor, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and to share this very, very special moment with us. This event is launching the Z.K. Matthews, the Year of Z.K. Matthews for 2024, and there will be other events that will be rolled out. I want to also thank the Faculty of Education as the host for this event, and Professor Mavuso, thank you very much for the work you did there. And then, of course, all members of council, the deputy chair is here, members of the executive, deans, academics, all the guests that are here. It's also very nice to see school learners here. Thank you for being here and participating, all the staff and students and all the people who have joined us online in this event. And then, of course, to thank the people who make the event possible. A lot of planning and work has to go into setting up the lecture. Institutional Advancement, who do all the event organizing, ICT for the online and all the technology you see here, as well as the Office of the Registrar for the procession and gowns, etc. And then we also do want to thank people who have sent messages. In particular, I want to recognize the message from Ambassador Tembi Tambo, who has sent greetings to the Matthews family in attendance for this really important event. So with those words, I encourage you to look out for other events that are going to commemorate this 2024 as the Year of Z.K. Matthews. Thank you very much.